LeaderCast.
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, I hope all is well with you today. It is Saturday morning, and I'm drinking a hot cup of Bottom Gun coffee from my friends at bottomguncoffee.com. I have another great show lined up for you, but before we get started, I just wanted to make a few quick announcements. First of all, I've got great news. I have a new book coming out. Yes, my latest book, You Have the Watch, is now complete, done, and it has been sent to my editors for final review. I am really excited about this book because it's not actually a book. It's a guided journal for leaders that will take you through an entire year of leadership training. There are 50 themes in the book, and each day you will reflect on a different facet of that theme. Now, the book is based loosely on my first leadership book, I Have the Watch, but this journal is designed to be on your desk at work for something that you can read and reflect on for about 15 minutes a day for an entire year. Now, leadership skills are like any other skills. You need to practice them to get better, and this journal helps you practice those skills. So if you're interested in learning more and pre-ordering this new guided journal, go to youhavethewatch.com, and I will be putting out more information in the near future as we get further to this book launch. So it's youhavethewatch.com to get a copy of this guided journal, which will take you through a year of leadership training. Now, I also want to remind our listeners that the Deep Leadership Podcast is now ranked by Listen Score as a top 5% show in the world. So out of 2.7 million podcasts globally, Deep Leadership is in that top 5%. Now, the reason we're there is because of listeners like you who listen every week, they subscribe, and they tell their friends about this podcast and especially great episodes that we have. So thank you for getting the word out. Now, if you're looking to support what I do on the show, all you have to do is purchase one of my books at johnsrennie.com. Every book that you buy helps me keep this show going, and I really appreciate it. So it's johnsrennie.com. And podcast listeners can use the discount code DEEP at checkout to get additional savings. Well, that's it for the announcement. My guest today is Karin Reed. Karin is an Emmy-award-winning broadcast journalist and an on-camera communications expert. She is a return guest to the show who has been here before to help us get the most out of virtual meetings. Now, today we're talking about something different. We're talking about hybrid meetings. Now, these are the meetings where you have some people physically present in the room and other people virtually present. Now, this is becoming a new way we do meetings, but there's some real problems with meetings like this if you don't consider all of the issues associated with this type of meeting. So Karin is going to help us guide through the best practices that we all need to know about. So everyone who has spent any time on Zoom needs to hear this message. So are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Karin Reed. If you've heard that name before, it's because she's a returning guest to the show. She was on episode 64 last April, and we had an amazing discussion. Now, Karin is an Emmy-award-winning broadcast journalist, a 3-time author, and an on-camera communication expert. She is the CEO of Speaker Dynamics, where she helps business professionals be more effective on-camera communicators. She has a new book out called Suddenly Hybrid: Managing the Modern Meeting, which she wrote with veteran industrial and organizational psychologist Dr. Joseph Allen. This new book helps readers deal with the complexity of the modern meeting, where more and more people are working remotely. I'm excited to have her back on the show to talk about this important topic. So, Karin, welcome back.
John, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's so good to have you. Had such a great discussion last year, and I'm excited that you've got this new book out called Suddenly Hybrid, and we're going to get a chance to talk about it. But before we dive into it, I just wanted to remind our listeners what you do at Speaker Dynamics.
Absolutely. So Speaker Dynamics is a corporate communication firm that teaches people how to speak with ease across any platform. So that's in person, on camera, or through virtual communication tools. So I've been working with mostly the executive leadership team, since 2012, but then COVID hit and it went from training the executive leadership team to training the entire enterprise. So it was a big shift in our business, and has been one of those situations where the pandemic actually had our business grow, just because these on-camera communication skills are things I've been teaching for a decade, but they became mission critical for everybody almost overnight. So we've been drinking from the fire hose quite a bit. My collaboration with Dr. Allen has been just really special, just to be able to work with him, learn the science of meetings, where video is at their core.
Yeah, I mean, it's our life now, right? I mean, that's what I was going to talk to you about, is like how much or what has changed in the past 2 years, the way we do business, the way we conduct meetings. I mean, what are you seeing? What are your clients talking to you? What are the challenges? What's happening these days?
Well, I mean, we've measured 2 meeting disruptions that were massive over the past 2 years. Prior to the pandemic, as Joe's data shows in the books, is we mostly met face to face. But then, the pandemic hit and those face to face interactions became off limits. So then we shifted dramatically to video. I mean, there was just this exponential growth in video platforms where people, either reluctantly or eagerly decided to speak through a webcam. And then with the waxing and waning of the pandemic, when Joe went back and tried to find out how people were meeting in like June of 2021, he found that people were slowly returning to face, but video was really still holding on stronger than a lot of people speculated it would. And there was this rise in these hybrid meetings. And as we're seeing the expectations and the desires of the workforce shift, those hybrid meetings are going to become something that is a necessity, and people have to figure out how to make them work because they are a little bit tricky.
Yeah, they are. We talked a little bit about it in your last visit here. This is before the book came out, and we were talking about, because I led an engineering team in the U.S. and in Mexico. This was long before the pandemic, but I remember we would have weekly meetings, and we would have a group of employees in the U.S. and we would be connected via camera to a group of employees in Mexico, and so we had this sort of a hybrid meeting, I guess you would call it. So we had,
right.
So you had 2 different rooms, but connected via video. And so, when you were on last, we talked about the, Suddenly Virtual was the last book you talked about, which was having virtual meetings. But the idea of a hybrid meeting is kind of a whole different set of dynamics. So that's what I want to talk to you about. So help us understand, what is a hybrid meeting and why are these meetings inevitable the way we're headed in the future of work?
Well, a hybrid meeting by definition is where you have people able to join a meeting through multiple communication mediums. So that means that they can join a meeting by being in the physical room. They can join by coming in via video, like we're doing right now. They can dial in. I think about the old hybrid meetings of old, which were typically like somebody dialing in on that spider phone that was in the middle of the conference.
Those were the worst.
Yeah, they were the worst. They were terrible. And people, typically just forgot that the people were even there.
Always. You always forget the guy was on the phone.
Right, exactly. You're like, hello. And they're like, wait, where did that voice come from? That is, kind of what a hybrid meeting can look like, which means that it can look like a lot of different things, depending upon how people are able to join, at that given time. And the reason why we think that hybrid meetings are inevitable and something that you need to figure out is because it's a reflection of how people want to work today. Flexible work, hybrid work is something that actually the majority of companies, especially knowledge workers, are saying that they want to work. They want to have that flexibility to spend some time in the office and some time at home or at the corner coffee shop, whatever that is. And so in order to connect them, you need to have some way of doing it. So hybrid meetings provide that communication connective tissue so that you can continue to get business done regardless of where team members are.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, the pandemic gave people a taste of work from home And a lot of people got this, level of freedom they haven't had in a long time. They could, wear their pajamas, drink their coffee, and I better put a good shirt on. I have a meeting at 9, right?
Right.
But they had a little more freedom, and and I think a lot of companies aren't going back. I think the employees are like, look, I just want to keep doing this. I don't want to go back to the office, and so I think the challenge is, how do we lead in this hybrid type of economy? Because you're going to have some people that will have to come in for various reasons, and you're going to have some people that are going to be remote. So you're naturally going to have these hybrid meetings. So we've got to figure out, how do we run these meetings now and in the future, knowing this is going to be the setup? Because that's really essentially what you're talking about in this book, right?
Right. And I think there was an impetus that, if we just figure out the math problem, we'll come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's when we will have our meetings.
Yes.
That sounded like a really great solution. But here's the thing. Ad hoc meetings happen all the time. And you can do all the planning in the world. But say Tuesday and Thursday is your meeting day, but then, there's some fire that breaks out on Wednesday. Not, I'm thinking metaphorically, not literally. Right. You got to figure out a way to meet on Wednesday when people are all over the place. And so that's why, hybrid meetings are really important. But the danger is, as a meeting leader, is that you can run the risk of creating a two-tiered system, especially if you've been in an organization that has been fully in person and that's the way you've operated. If you truly are saying that you want to be a hybrid organization, you've got to change your systems, you've got to change your technology, you've got to change your mindset and your entire company's mindset about remote work and incorporating everybody's opinions and work effort into the collective effort of the company, because otherwise you're going to have perhaps some proximity bias where those who are in the physical office will derive greater opportunity as a result of that, whereas those who are remote may miss out on some of those opportunities. So you really have to ward against that by having some policies in place for that reason.
Interesting. Yeah. So you just touched on, so what makes these hybrid meetings so difficult? And maybe some areas that we didn't even think of, like what you said, there's this proximity bias, right? You're likely going to listen to Susan because she's right here, right?
Reach out and touch Susan, right? She's right to you. Yeah, exactly.
Versus Joe, who's over on, he's a square on a screen somewhere, right? And
right.
So what are some of the other challenges with these hybrid meetings?
Well, I mean, the reason why they're so tricky, John, is that you're dealing with a variety of communication mediums whenever you are meeting hybrid. When you met face-to-face, you all had the same communication medium. It's the air that you're all sharing. When we met virtually, we all shared the same communication medium. It was our screens. But now, you've got screens, you've got, the air that people are breathing, you've got, people perhaps calling in, not a good choice, just incidentally, but you have to have all those folks be able to talk to each other and interact with each other in a way that feels like there's participation equity, because that really is the goal. So that's why you need to have kind of some of those strategies in place in order to make sure that you have the ability for everybody to communicate fully and to participate fully. And there are quite a few things that you can do from a leader perspective to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought about it, but I mean, if you think about it, even where you place the camera is going to be an issue. So if you've got the camera, behind the leader's head or whatever, and it's just showing the room, they're never going to see the person that's supposedly running the meeting. I know when, I was mentioning the Mexico and the US, we actually it was kind of cool. We put the camera at the end of the table. And I was on the opposite end of the table, and then everybody was sitting beside there. And then on the other side, they did the same thing. So the leader of the Mexican team was so it was like a long table, like a virtual long table. Right. So we tried to set it up that way so it actually almost looked like a long table. But I think, if you don't think that through, everyone's getting a different experience, right? So I think you have to think about what is the experience of everybody that's in this meeting, both the physical people and the ones that are joining remotely. What's their experience like? Are they looking at the back of the head of of Joe, right?
Right, right.
Right?
I mean, the meeting room design is huge. You're talking about, something that is, really important. And it's interesting that, before we even, heard of, COVID-19, that you were thinking about, okay, how can we make this as, I guess, in-person feeling as possible, and so, for example, when I would be hosting webcasts, there would be a panel I would be in person with it. I'd be moderating the discussion. And then we had 3 cameras on the opposite side, of us. So it was what you're talking about, where you kind of have this half moon on one side with real people in the studio, and then you had a half moon of cameras on the other side. And the panelists would say, where am I supposed to look? And I'm like, well, think about the cameras as representing people who are present in our great discussion we're about to have. And sometimes you pay attention to the people on the one side of the table. Sometimes you pay attention to the people on the other side of the table. People on the other side of the table, you can't see their faces, but you can see the cameras, and that's representing them. So you just have to kind of give equal time to everyone who is present. And I think that that's important from a leader perspective to understand as well. If you are trying to lead the meeting from an in-office, in-conference room position, don't just be looking at the people who are in front of you. You need to actually sometimes turn your attention to the camera so that they feel like you are actually giving them, equal attention as those who are like physically present. But the one thing I would also suggest that some people don't think about as readily is if you're a meeting leader, try to rotate the position from which you lead that meeting. Sometimes you lead it from an in-person in the conference room position. Other times, try leading it from a virtual position, because that sends a really strong signal that if you're a hybrid company, a hybrid workforce, it truly does not matter where you are joining from for that meeting. You are still equally valued. And look, I'm leading the meeting from a virtual position. So that is one way to send a strong signal, and also remind you as a leader what it's like to be an attendee of a meeting from a virtual position.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny because when we talked about it last time, it was this, everybody was equal, right? Everybody had an equal square, and there's something good about that, right? So everybody has an equal spot at the table, if you will.
Right.
But when you go hybrid, then the equality goes away, right? Yeah. And so what you're saying is that we should sometimes shift to being the square on the screen, so we get that perspective. Yes. Even if we have a group of people that are in the office, say, look, I'm gonna join from my office. You guys can meet here. Just so that's interesting to change your viewpoint, so that you are not biased towards one group or the other. I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you touched on this a little bit. So what do we have to do differently when we're conducting a hybrid meeting? What are the things that we need to be thinking about as leaders when we're doing this?
Proactive facilitation is a must. I know there are some managerial styles that go for the free-for-all exchange of ideas in a meeting, and let's just kind of do a brainstorm. If you try to do that in a hybrid setting, you have inevitable inequalities in participation, because especially like say that you are leading the meeting from in the room. Yeah. Those who are in the physical room with you will find it much easier to dominate the conversation, and those who are joining virtually may have a hard time getting a word in edgewise. Yeah. So that's why we strongly advocate coming up with some sort of turn-taking policy to let people know how to get into the conversation queue, and then be sure to call on people so that they can actually, weigh in. One of the interesting strategies that we've seen a lot of successful hybrid organizations adopt is that remote people speak first. So say, for example, you're working through your agenda, you get to a topic of discussion, you're in the meeting room, the physical meeting room as the leader for that particular day. You might be tempted to turn to your right and say, hey, John, what do you think about this? Instead, we would suggest you turn your attention to the faces on the screen and say, hey, what do you think, Jane? I'd love to get your opinion. What that does is it provides a window of opportunity for remote attendees to weigh in, but it also raises the collective awareness immediately of those who are in the physical conference room, that there are more people who are present than just them.
So you don't forget about the guy on the speakerphone, right? That
right.
All the time. And I definitely see that happening. And the one thing too, we talked about this in your last visit, is that, for example, the chat function. You have everybody in as a square, everybody's equal. You have this chat function that you can use, and you can use if you have a facilitator that can read the questions, and you can have really good, you can raise a hand virtually, which is really interesting. There's a lot of things you can do when everyone is virtual. But when you have the hybrid, it sort of changes, right? So if someone has what I like about the typical a straight pure virtual meeting is that your introverts have that chance to bring something up on the chat or to raise a virtual hand and bring up an issue. Whereas now your introverts could get lost if you're not careful, right?
But you can still use chat in a hybrid setting. And we highly encourage that, pull those habits from our fully virtual lives into the hybrid one, because you're absolutely right. Validate both nonverbal and verbal forms of participation. Because honestly, if you are remote, sometimes it can be difficult to, get your thoughts in, because it's not intentional, but you can be overlooked a little bit easier than if you're in the physical room. So if the meeting leader makes a commitment to looking at that chat and says at the top, hey, if you have something that you'd like to say, please put it in chat and we will incorporate it into the dialogue. That changes the tone of the meeting. It sets an expectation. But with that in mind, you need to follow through on that expectation and actually pay attention to it. But one thing I would also counsel is having a chat monitor. A meeting leader in a hybrid setting has a lot more that they have to deal with than in a typical meeting. There's a big cognitive burden as a result of managing the technology, managing all the different communication modalities, trying to possibly make a decision based upon the information being presented. If you can start to spread out that responsibility for the success of the meeting amongst everyone on the team, that can really help. So like having a chat monitor can be a great position to create, because they can say, oh, hey, John, actually, Sandy has something that she wanted to say, and can pull her in. You can have somebody who is like the technology lead. So say somebody's having difficulty with their microphone that day. You can take 20 minutes to troubleshoot that, and it eats into the meeting time. But otherwise, what I would suggest is taking the technology lead and the person who's having a challenge, put them in a breakout room, let them figure it out, and then come back in. Then you can also have in-room buddies or, in-room advocates for the virtual folks. So say that you have somebody who is, in the meeting room, we're going to call him Joe, and then I'm joining virtually. I would be their buddy. Joe would be my in-room buddy, and make sure that I have an opportunity to speak up. So that's what, I mean by it's like a collective mindset shift where people recognize we are all better off if everybody has an opportunity to be a part of the decision-making process and the information gathering process, but it requires work. It requires a willingness to be aware of everybody who is there.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
One ping only, please. As I thought, John Rennie's new book, All in the Same Boat, is right over there. It's at allinthesameboatbook.com. Your orders are to get there now. And remember, be careful what you shoot at. Most things in here don't react too well to bullets.
Is your boss a jerk? I understand you're in the hospital, but I'm going to need you to come in today. Do they lack any ability to actually lead people? Oh, it's fine. I'll just find somebody else that can do it, okay? John is offering a new service just for you. For only $10, he will anonymously mail a copy of his best-selling book, I Have the Watch, to your boss with a personal note. Go to IHaveTheWatch.com and enter the discount code BOSS at checkout.
What about chat? Do the people in the physical room have access to the chat, or is it just the virtual people are chatting? Or
I like the idea of having everybody have access to the chat. So, you could bring your own personal device and just, if you're in the physical room, you don't want to have your camera on because that will be really confusing.
Right.
But you can just have your chat open so that you can converse as well with the people who are remote. But as far as being represented, I would say you want to have the conference room camera be representing everybody in the room. But the The other thing, John, that I'm hearing a lot of now as we see more organizations move into this hybrid situation is people are overlooking the importance of audio in the conference room. I think there's, probably when you talk to folks in Mexico, maybe you had like a microphone that was perhaps attached to the webcam that you used.
No, we did thought a little bit about it. We did have a microphone that was in the center of the room.
Excellent.
And so we had an Omni mic that was in the center of the room, and we had the same microphone in both Mexico and the U.S. And
super smart, because not a lot of companies are doing that, right?
Well, that's the problem. We were worried that down to the end of the table, you wouldn't hear the one person who had an idea. So we were trying to think through the best way to do it. But I definitely see that's a problem if you don't have, like you said, if you're just using the typical mic on a speaker, it's going to be, it's going to sound like it's a million miles away, and you're not going to hear the people that are farthest away from the camera mic. And so microphones are definitely an important part of it.
And probably if you have a large conference room, multiple microphones, those microphone pucks that you have strategically situated. And it's something that if you're in the conference room, you don't think about because you can't hear yourself, right? But it is something I'm getting a lot of feedback on now, where people who are joining virtually are frustrated because they can't make out the conversation in the conference room, and it feels like they're marginalized as a result.
Yeah. There's some good stuff there. I do like the idea of the chat, having the people in the room on the chat as well, because I like the private chat function you can use as well. Like, hey, Susan, I don't forget to ask this, to remind somebody that's in the room. You can have, as you mentioned, having a buddy.
Your in-room buddy, meeting. Right.
Yeah, your in-room buddy could be using private chat to remind you of things without interrupting the meeting, which is, I really think that feature, we talked about it last time, that chat, I think makes a meeting more effective because you can have some dialogue that's not interrupting the main dialogue, and that's why I think that's effective. So that's why I like the idea of the in-room people using the chat function as well. I like that idea a lot. So microphone, camera, the chat function. How do we? I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit. How do we avoid like forgetting people, especially the virtual attendees? How do we avoid, forgetting that they're up there? And I think you talked about some of the ideas is make sure to call on them first. I like that idea. Having an in-room buddy. Are there any other ideas that we should be thinking about?
I think you just have to get to a point where you're all very aware of who is, attending a meeting at any given time. So one of the things we've also seen is whenever people send out a calendar invite for a meeting, they'll indicate on there what meeting format they're using. And they'll maybe have a shorthand for like face-to-face. It'll be like an F, virtual, fully virtual has a V, a hybrid, there'll be an H. So there's a recognition that, okay, this is the kind of meeting I'm going into. So that can be also very helpful. The other thing what I would suggest is if you're in a hybrid meeting and you're planning on joining remotely, you need to have your camera on. Yes, it is a non-negotiable at this point because you want to make your presence felt as much as possible. And you will disappear if you are just being represented by a box with your name on it. So you want to make yourself as present as possible. And so that there is some responsibility on the attendee side to do that and then to actively participate. Too often, you get in a situation where people, don't turn their cameras on, and maybe they're listening to what's going on in the meeting, but they're probably multitasking.
Yes.
And like, what's the point of that? Truly. So in the actual meeting room itself, you want to make sure that your monitors are big enough that they can be represented visually in an appropriate fashion. Having a small monitor in the corner of the conference room, with maybe somebody sitting in front of it, that is not, participation equity. That is not going to allow for meeting equity. So you want to make sure that they have a big monitor that can represent them. There's in the book, you'll see there is a picture that what Google did with, kind of like this campfire sort of scenario where you've every other seat, there is a big monitor between two people that represents one of the virtual attendees. So like their heads are almost the same size as the heads of the people who are there in person. So it creates this kind of, half circle almost, but it is a better way of kind of incorporating the in-person and the remote attendees in a way that feels like there's better equality amongst participants.
I don't know if it's just my age showing, but it just seems a little creepy to me.
You have to take a look at it. I mean, and to your point, I mean, there's a lot of innovation that has been done trying to problem solve for hybrid. And I think in some ways, the innovation has gotten a little bit ahead of people's technical proficiency. I work with people on a daily basis, helping them to be able to just be good virtual meeting attendees. And people consider it a win if they can share their screen. So if you introduce some of this, higher level technical stuff, it may just never be used, which, really is important to understand as an organization that you can invest in all of this amazing technology, but unless you train your people on how to use it, you're not going to get a return on your investment.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Really, so when it comes to these hybrid meetings, the technology is something that you have to think about, because I think we've gotten used to Zoom meetings, right? We've gotten used to virtual meetings now after 2 years of seeing people in squares. Right. We're kind of used to it. Right. But with a hybrid meeting comes a lot of thoughts around camera placement, as you mentioned, the monitors, where are they? The microphones, what are you using? How is everybody heard? So the technology play is as much as important as the physical meeting itself is to make sure that people. What did you say? They're equally represented. Is that what you said?
Participation equity, meeting equity, collaboration equity. So you're not creating that two-tier system, right?
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, as a leader myself, and I've always believed that the best ideas come from the quietest person in the room. So I've learned that over 30 years of leading. And I would fear not being able to hear the voice of the quietest person in the room just because of they get forgotten or they disappear or they're a little tiny square in the back of a room and I forget to call on them. And I miss out on that nugget, because I always believe that the quietest person in the world in the room is thinking while the other people are talking. And I always want to find that little gem that they've been thinking about. Almost always it's the solution to our problem. And I don't want to ignore that. And I can see in a hybrid meeting where you have that potential to ignore the quiet people if you're not careful.
And what I would suggest is adding another role to your meetings. Have a meeting moderator. Somebody, if you're the leader and you are also the decision maker, it's really a great add-on to have somebody there who can just keep track of those kinds of things, like who has participated, who has not been heard. Are we sticking to the timestamps laid out in the agenda? Are we capturing, all of the action items? All of these things are really important, but it's a heavy burden for a leader who is the decision maker to carry whenever they're trying to, come up with the best possible business decisions. So like adding that sort of role can alleviate some of that and the fear of missing out on that great idea that perhaps did not get a voice.
Yeah, that's really important. Those roles are really critical in these type of meetings. So like, if you think about it and through the studies that you've done and the people you've talked to, are there some companies that are doing this really well? And what does it look like when it's done really well?
Yeah, there actually are, and we have several that we profile in the book. There was a company called Envato out of Australia that was created as a hybrid company because the founders love travel and they wanted to be able to prioritize that. So they had to have a policy of, their employees can work from anywhere for up to 3 months, provided that they can still connect. Like you can't go and live in a hut and have no internet connection for 3 months. That's not permissible. But they give their employees a lot of flexibility as a result from that. But what they do also prioritize is the opportunity to bring everybody together. They have these back to base meetings, they call them, where everybody comes back to the corporate headquarters and they have a week of building and culture building. As one of the employees said, it's probably not the most productive week, but it's an important week.
Yeah, no, that's actually really important. I talk about in my writing is that these, when you share common experiences, you build relationships. And part of the problem with remote work, you don't share enough common experiences, so you don't build those relationships. So I think I like the idea of back to base a requirement so that you do have that connection. You can share a meal, or, you just mentioned that maybe not a lot of work gets done, but actually I would say those connections deepen when you have those common experiences. And that's really important to build a culture and to build a team. You have to have common experiences. You have to go out to dinner. You have to go do some crazy offsite event where you go bowling and half the people don't know how to bowl, and you remember those stories for years. So you have to have those. So that's really important. That's interesting. Really neat. Back to base. I like that.
And it's funny because I call it like it's like an offsite onsite. Because those kind of things used to happen. You'd go off to some resort or something like that. But now come back to the headquarters, and we're going to do it here. And then we'll go and maybe go play mini golf. Or have share a cup of coffee with somebody who you normally see on Zoom every day. But I've even experienced it in my own organization where I see people on a regular basis. Through something like this. And I was actually meeting up with one of them for the first time in person. And I think it was like a year. And we saw each other and we were like, hey, how are you? But it wasn't like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in a year. I felt like, this is pretty typical. I see every day. And that was a shock to both of us, that we felt like there was still this very tight bond, this familiarity that comes with seeing somebody every day. But, we only see each other from the chest up. So it was a very odd sort of, kind of an aha moment for us that, wow, well, you can build relationships this way. But whenever you get together, it still creates a different energy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, excellent. That's really good. I like that a lot. It's funny because you said your new offsite meeting is really going to be an onsite meeting. Come back and meet each other for the first time. Or love this. So I understand the book just came out. It came out yesterday. We're recording this on the 3rd. It came out on February 2nd. And as I understand it, it's the #1 new release in business communication on Amazon. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. That we are so excited about it. And, we've gotten a lot of nice feedback. We had great endorsements from some pretty big names, which was very exciting. But I think that the timing should be pretty good because at this point, we're seeing more companies, start to really lean into this hybrid work. And, the variant is hopefully on the downslope. And so people are trying to figure out, okay, how can we move into this new phase? Some have tried it and have found it to be really, really difficult. I am hearing stories of companies that have tried hybrid meetings and they're like, this is too hard. Everybody just go back on Zoom.
Yes.
But you're missing out on something that's really key with human beings. And it's the fact that we like to be with others. We like to be in the presence of others. And even if you have the opportunity to bring some people, in the same room together, that's still really important. And it creates this sense of belonging and like you're part of a team. It's Joe calls it entitivity. And it's a powerful feeling that creates good team bonding. So, being able to capture that even with slices of your team is really, really critical. It breaks down all those isolation barriers that we've been experiencing. So yes, hybrid can be hard, but hybrid can work really well, provided that you tweak some things and put some strategies and policies in place. So don't be frustrated. Get some expert advice and then, go down the list of things that we suggest. That's what I do like how the book is structured. We are very practical in our advice. There's a lot of tools, checklists, reflection exercises, which actually can be found on a companion website that you can download. Right. So it's designed almost to be like a workbook and not just something that you consume.
So how can people find out about you, your company, and this new book?
Okay, well, you can get Suddenly Hybrid anywhere you buy books. So
That's great.
So go to your neighborhood bookshop, go to one of the online marketplaces. You will find it there. You mentioned one of them just now, and we are really excited about that. As far as, finding me, the business is Speaker Dynamics. And if you go to speakerdynamics.com, you'll learn all about what we do. And we'd be happy to help you to train your people, train your managers, train your teams on how to successfully communicate across all of these different mediums that are now all kind of coming together for our hybrid workforce of the future.
Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. Karin, I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I really do encourage those of you who are listening in, don't take a hybrid meeting for granted. There's a lot of things to think about when you go into these hybrid meetings. You think you've mastered Zoom, maybe you have, that's great, but the hybrid meeting is a whole different animal. And as we start moving into where some people are getting together and some people are remote, you're going to have these problems that, as Karin points out, we've got to resolve so we don't leave people out. So it's just really important. The book is called Suddenly Hybrid. It's available now. I really encourage everyone who's listening in, who's in this scenario where we have hybrid meetings, to pick this book up and really don't fall into the mistakes that you can make if you don't think about the technology and these having people on site to be able to help the leader through the meeting. So it's really important. So Karin, thank you for coming on the show and talking about this really important topic.
John, thank you for having me. Hopefully a lot of people will hear the call and pick up the book and realize, hey, hybrid meetings actually can be incredibly effective. You just have to have a little know-how.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, John.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.
Welcome to Tuning Into Sound Wellbeing, where we harmonise your mind, body and soul. I'm Amanda, your sound therapy expert.
And I'm Stephen, the curious explorer uncovering the mysteries of sound.
Together we explore vibrations, frequencies and the power of sound therapy and tuning forks.
Discover ancient wisdom, reduce stress and tune into a healthier life. Subscribe to Tuning Into Sound Wellbeing today.
Hey there, fabulous souls. I'm Stephanie Baklaan.
And I'm Eden Alpert.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, Unapologetically Fab.
Get ready to join us on an amazing and real journey as we dive into life after 40 and own it.
We're all about changing the narrative, leaning into who you are, and living a life by your own design.
Join us as we embrace life unapologetically and redefine success.
This is Unapologetically Fab,
an Electric Cat production.
See you there.
Electricast.